And like the man said, you're listening to Rains County Radio, rainscountyradio.com. And today's guest is Dr. Michael Ryce, the founder and director of Heartland, a self-healing center in the Ozark Mountains. He's a world-renowned lecturer and teacher on health and healing with doctorates in natural
Naturopathic.
naturopathic, thank you,
There you
medicine
go.
and holistic philosophy. His focus is studies combined mind-body principles and something I find fascinating, which is the sort of combination of physics, ancient Aramaic studies, and pioneering fields in self-healing. That's one thing I would like to ask you as far as not necessarily a question, but how did you come about combining physics with ancient studies in regards to self-healing?
Well, my disease journey started out in utero. My mother had toxemia the last 6 days I was in utero, and they gave her Pitocin for those 6 days to try to force me out. And the night that I was being born, they contacted my father at work and said, if you want to see this kid alive, you better get down here because he will not make it through the night. Well, fortunately, I did make it through the night. And the next year, I was almost dead 4 different times. My early school years, I was never in school the first couple of weeks. I was always in an oxygen tent in the hospital. There came a point as I grew up and started to mature, my studies in school were electronics with a side study in physics. And I came to the point where I recognized that the drugs that I was living on while they were keeping me alive were killing me. And came to the conclusion that every drug is a disease disguised as a cure. Yes, you can suppress a set of symptoms with the drug, but you'll notice all the other things that come along with it. Every drug causes diseases. And sometimes the diseases are not as severe as the ones they're suppressing, so, they can seem to be beneficial. Sometimes the so-called side effects, the diseases they cause, are much worse than the symptoms that they're suppressing. And when you suppress a symptom, you haven't dealt with it. It's kind of like, imagine we got a house that's kind of dirty and moldy and messy, and we just, lift the carpet up and sweep the dirt under the rug. Hey, things look pretty good. But of course, that dirt and the food crumbs and such that we sweep under the rug end up attracting all kinds of critters that don't belong in a house. And sooner or later, the thing falls apart. Well, it's no different with the body. So I started to understand that, and I started a journey to understand healing, to heal myself, to work on my own physiological challenges, emotional challenges. So that was my beginning point. And I studied naturopathy, and naturopathy is basically healing without x-ray, surgery, or drugs. What's natural to the body? What's missing from the body? What does the body need? Or what's in the structure that isn't designed to be there? And as I started to study that from a physical perspective, I started to apply the physics work that I'd done previously. And one of my favorite quotes and sort of a foundation for the whole body of work I've developed over the last half century is Albert Einstein, where he says, on such things as matter, we have been all wrong. What we have heretofore called matter is energy whose vibrations have been so low as to be perceptible to the senses. There is no matter. Einstein says the body doesn't exist. Matter doesn't exist. Now, some people might know better than Einstein. I kind of doubt it. And when you start realizing that he was absolutely correct, that what we call matter is a picture made up by our minds to try to make sense of this world of energy that we live in. If I could adjust the rate of vibration in which my eye receives information, I would look out and I wouldn't see you, a body. I would see a whirring mass of electrons, protons, neutrons, and light. I wouldn't see a body. My mind structures the thing called a body, and I have my own individual space here in this energy field, as you have a space in the energy field. But there's only one energy field. We're all part of one energy field. And when I realized that the 2 square feet that I have control of If I put toxic energies into it, then that 2 square feet's going to suffer. If I learn to remove the toxic energies, then that 2 square feet's going to heal. If I learn to heal that 2 square feet, then I can become a space that can support others in healing their 2 square feet. And we start to move in the direction of the true experience of a human life. Most of the world is trained to believe that the constructs in their minds are literal, accurate pictures of what's happening out there in the world. And they're not. I mean, the whole world's living in a lie. We say, I see something. And what we're really saying is, my antenna, the eye, received a frequency of light with information in it. That information resonated a certain set of information inside of me. And out of that information, I painted on the inside of my eyeballs a picture that I call what's happening in the world. You know, you can verify that easily for yourself. Just go sit in a courtroom where 6 different people testify about any given topic. And you'll notice that you'll wonder if any 2 of them were at the same event. Like, how is it possible? Well, it's possible because I live in a reality structure, perception in my mind, and you live in a reality structure, perception in yours. And each one of us does. Now, most of us have been taught that if we're in some sort of pain or trauma, then somebody or something outside of us is the cause, and all we need to do is change or fix them or abuse them or get rid of them, then we'll be okay. Never realizing that what we're experiencing continuously are the energies that we've chosen to engage in. And relative to this integrated energy system that I call my 2 square feet, there are basically 2 qualities of energy. There's that which will build it up and support it and strengthen it, and there's that which will tear it down and destroy it. In the ancient Aramaic language, which was the next step where I came into contact with the manuscript that you had mentioned, the Kebouris, in the Aramaic language, there's a word that describes putting toxic energies into the human system. It's actually an archery term that they use. If you were on the archery range and you fired at the bullseye and you missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell, "Sin." You're off the mark. That's all the word means. It's an archery term. That's all it means, is you're off the mark. So if I put an energy in that's off the mark, then I have sinned in that context. Nothing to do with the Greek idea of guilt and fear and sin. Just it's off the mark. It's information that tells me what I'm doing to myself. And if I put that off the mark energy into my lung, then I'm going to have lung disease. If I put it into my big toe, I'm going to have the big toe disease. If I put it into my brain, my liver, my heart, I'm going to have the brain, the liver, the heart disease. And if I learn to remove those energies, then that part of my 2 square feet is going to heal. The process in the ancient Aramaic language of removal is called forgiveness. Forgiveness, the Greeks came along. If most people sat in the places where they talk about this man they call Jesus, his real name is actually Yeshua. If most people sat in the places where they talk about him, or pardon me, if Yeshua sat in the place where most talk about him, he'd say, that's all Greek to me, because it doesn't contain his Aramaic thought. And so the Greeks told us, well, you know, if you're in pain, if you're in trauma, if there's quote unquote sin in you, an energy that's causing trauma in you, then just find somebody to blame. It's their fault. But then be nice about it and forgive them and let them off the hook for what's inside of you. So, you know, if I let you off the hook for what's going on inside of me, have I done anything to change what's going on inside of me?
Right.
No.
You didn't.
And so our whole Western culture has been trained to take the pictures painted on the inside of their eyeballs and pretend they're actually looking at something out there when what they're looking at is a reflection of the content of their own minds. There's a really interesting video, if somebody wants to verify this from a more scientific perspective. There's a gentleman named Anil, A-N-I-L, Seth, S-E-T-H. He's a neuroscientist. He does a TED Talk. If you just look on YouTube and watch his TED Talk, he explains the whole thing, the whole process of how the mind creates perception. And perception comes from the content of my mind. That's why you and I could sit in a courtroom and testify about an accident. And let's say we watched the accident happen and let's say I have a prejudice against women, and so I get up in front of the judge and I'm saying, yeah, and I saw that woman run that red light, and it's her fault. And you, not having that prejudice, sat there and watched and went, excuse me, it was the guy that ran the red light. You have a different reality, different perceptual construct. So the idea here is that, and how forgiveness relates to healing, is that if I've put an energy that's off the mark into my tissue structure somewhere, it's an incoherent energy that's going to create a disturbance in the organ in which it's stored. The mind functions through every cell in the so-called body. And so if I put disintegrative energy into this piece of tissue, the tissue is going to start to fall apart. It's going to start to dysfunction. If I get enough tissue dysfunctioning, I die. Therefore, in the ancient Aramaic, they said the wages of sin is death. And that wasn't some kind of theological threat. God's going to get you for your sins. It's just, here's how physiology works, folks. And here's how forgiveness works. You learn to collapse the perceptual constructs of your mind that make it all everybody else's fault. In this particular culture, at this stage, my take is the average person by the age of 4 is a very devout, card-carrying member of the one world universal religion of blame. Everything in my life is everybody else's fault, until I learn that everything that shows up in my mind and my physiology, I'm the keeper of it. And if I learn the technology with which to collapse the lies that have me blaming everybody else, then I get to touch into those energetic patterns in me that create my diseases and disorders and remove them. I lived on inhalator and pills until I was about 25 years of age. Except for a couple of times when I've had tooth infections, I haven't had a drug in my body in decades. Decades. And actually, my lungs still carried up until about 3 years ago. I lived my whole life with a wheeze in my lungs. There was always that wheeze. There was always this rattling sound underneath my breath. And about, I guess it's about 2 years ago now, a little less than 2 years, I got COVID. And when I got COVID and I started to work with what COVID was doing in my body, the 4th day of COVID was the last time I had a wheeze in my lungs. And that's almost 2 years ago now.
Glad that you got through over that part, as many
Well,
people.
with my history and the so-called age that they say I'm at, I should have been absolutely dead. And I haven't had a rattle or wheeze in my lungs since I had COVID. It was one of the most it was traumatic, but it gave me a chance to look at and deal with what I had carried in my lungs all the way back from birth and get to clear it out, get to forgive it.
Yeah, I think that it's an amazing thing because, COVID, with all the messages that were put out in the media, it was sort of hitting a mass consciousness. And for you to overcome something that was not just on a personal level between you and a particular disease, there was a whole spiritual, mental attack that was being put really on the whole world. For you to overcome that, I think is absolutely fabulous. And I think one of the things you mentioned was forgiveness. I would love for you to give some different aspects on it. You mentioned that it was a misconception on how we get it from the Greeks, but with your studies in Aramaic and stuff, how did forgiveness? How would you define it? And how would you describe it on what most people think about it, and then go into how it can really be effective?
Okay. Well, I'll just say that where that whole thing came from was a text called the Khabouris Manuscript. I'm the director of a foundation that's translating a copy of the oldest known New Testament in its original Aramaic language. And again, in that language, the word forgive is a tool with which you reach inside of yourself and remove what did not belong in you. You'll notice, unless you're just, giving this to all of your audience, you'll notice that unless you're just a generally miserable person, you're pretty happy with almost everybody when they're doing everything that you want them to do, right? When everybody's doing what you would like, you're fulfilling the goals you hold for them. We're all pretty happy with virtually everybody in our lives. But when somebody violates the goal we hold, that's when we go into hostility or fear. That's when we go into the disintegrative energies that are stored within us, and we have somebody else to blame. We have a language that says things like, you made me sad, you made me sad, you made me afraid, you hurt me. And my offering is, shy of somebody punching you in the nose, cancel the thought. Nobody can hurt you. But if there's hurt in you, there will be a whole procession of people who are going to show up and resonate your hurt. Hence the title of my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? One of the biggest atrocities, I think, that has been done to us as human beings down through the ages, and that we've bought into, is that we've had hidden from us the fact that we are by nature creators. You and I are creative beings. And everybody loves that idea when the creation is going well. But when the creation's not going so well, doesn't everybody know who's to blame for why the creation isn't going so well? I'm a victim. Look, somebody else did it to me. I have not. Well, yes, I'm a powerful person, but this one was caused by somebody else. They're doing it to me. And most of humanity today is still playing the game of victimhood because they don't have a clue how to forgive. They were told to let everybody that they're blaming off the hook, which leaves the original sin, the original offending energy within their own structure still. In Aramaic, actually, the forgiveness process, the key way into forgiving in Aramaic is the goals that you hold in any given situation. In the Aramaic language, the word forgive, the word that's been translated as forgive, is shabag or shabak. And that word literally translates to cancel. There's some interesting, just to give some background on it, there's some interesting Harvard research, goes back into the 1950s. It's probably the most quoted research in psychological history, I mean, ever. And what they came up with is that, they've got electrodes hooked to people's heads and they're measuring brain cell firing. And what they came up with was that in a time frame where they could measure 10,000 units of electrical activity happening in the brain, the max amount of data that went into conscious awareness was 9 bits. Little tiny framework. 9 bits out of 10,000 is all we get to see painted on the inside of our eyeballs. Now, obviously, if that's accurate, and we do get to see, if you talk to the average psychologist today, they'll tell you that 80, 85, 90, maybe as much as 95 to 98% of our thinking is unconscious. In essence, that's what that research is saying. We only see this little tiny thing, tiny bit. And we only get to see the tiny bit of information that we give our minds permission to show us. So that means the mind is an evidential device. I only get to see the evidence I hold of my own BS. And of course, that's belief system. Somebody may have a different reality for those initials, but I get to see the evidence of my own belief system. So if I'm at the accident and I believe women are always the problem, then I get to see the accident from the point of view of the woman running the red light, which didn't ever happen. But I get to experience that because that's the bias I hold in my mind. The indicator that there's a bias in my mind and that my construct is false at any given moment is that there's hostility or fear moving in me. The energies of hostility or fear, which virtually everybody blames everybody else for, move in a person because they're inside of them. Hostility and fear are indicators that my mind is using corrupt data to build my view of, my perception of the world. And I better learn how to collapse those false perceptions and get to the root, what's underneath it, what's hidden in what today we would call the unconscious. In the ancient teachings, it was called the heart. Remember, they said, take care of the heart, for out of it are the issues in life. It wasn't the physical organ, the heart. That word heart there is, in our modern updated language, would be the unconscious. When you hear this man, Yeshua, saying, you must forgive from your heart the wrongs of your brother, it's not a bleeding heart statement, forgive from your heart your brother. He's saying, whatever from your unconscious you've used to build your brain's image of your brother, so your perception looks like, once again, the problem I've got is all about him or her or them. And you'll notice if you've been through a particular painful reality 87 different times with 42 different people, you're the only one that was there every time. Your realities are about you. They're all about your content. So what the man was saying is, you've got to learn how to go into your own unconscious and clean up what you're putting into your brain's image of everybody else for, blaming everybody else for, and creating victimhood through your blame. And that process was called forgiveness. So in Aramaic, that word shabag or shabak literally translates to cancel. The goal that I hold that's causing my mind to utilize my own corrupt data to build this pained construct I have about, of course, everybody else. It's never about me, or it can be about me, and that's the self-blame game. When I hold that kind of perception and I hold that as true, then I'm building pictures out of the content of my mind that I paint on the inside of my eyeballs and I believe are true about somebody out there. But again, as I say, if you've been through it 87 different times with 42 different people, sooner or later you got to wake up and go, I'm the only one that was every time. This is about me. And I'm ready to start to own. I'm ready to do some self-exploration. I'm ready to go inside and start to deal with this. You know, when does the average person start looking out there in the world? Have you ever raised children?
Oh, yes.
Do you have any children?
Yes, I have a daughter.
So think about what we did. Think about what we did with our kids. Oh, look at this shiny thing. Oh, look here. Oh, look here. Let me tell you about this. Let me tell. And all those early years, we've been taught to look out there, look out there, look out there. And most everybody's looking out there and has no interest whatsoever in going in here.
Mm.
What we need to do is balance with our children. Like we have a granddaughter that's 5, and we've been raising her since she was born. You know, a couple of days a week we have her. And she's with us 2, sometimes 3 days a week. And one of the things that we'll do is like, oh, it's time for some quiet time, Arya. Oh, let me guide. And we'll sit down and go into a quiet meditative space, and she'll guide us to go inside rather than out there, out there, out there. And I mean, literally, the whole culture believes that they're victim of everybody out there when there's something wrong in their lives.
Well,
And of course, when things are going great, it's their responsibility.
that's
So what for? Go ahead.
no, that sounds like a fascinating example. I'd like to explore that some more because I think that that's something that can help a lot of people that are raising children right now to give them. You gave us one example. Can you give us some others on maybe that you've worked on or what you've done with her? Because I think that that's the root of a lot of the problems. You're absolutely right. We're taught from the very early age to start looking out at other things, but not really self-reflect. So maybe as a question, that was a great one. Please, I didn't mean to interrupt, but please go ahead and explore that further. But I'd love to hear some other examples.
Yeah, actually, there's a school teacher named Julie Haberstick who started doing our work about 35 years ago. She taught in the a really poverty-stricken area in the inner city in Dayton, Ohio, and taught children in kindergarten, grade 1. And she took our work and put it into a child's format, a book that we published called Healing Children, Loving Children. And one of the examples of, you know, oftentimes we have parents who do a timeout with their kid. Well, Johnny, you made me angry, and you go sit in the corner, and you sit in that chair and you face the corner, and now I'm going to discipline you. Well, it's interesting. The word discipline comes from the word disciple. It means properly taught. It does not mean properly beat up. You know, when they say spare the rod, spoil it, like you're supposed to hit a kid into submission, the rod was something that people leaned on to be supported. It wasn't something to beat little kids with. And this whole punishment game is pure, absolute insanity. So one of the things that she did rather than time out is that she created a love chair in her classroom. So if a child was misbehaving, quote unquote, was not in harmony with the rules of the classroom, which created a distraction in the learning environment, what Julie would do is they would have that child go to the love chair. The children had been taught to do a love exchange where they get quiet, they tap into the love that they are, they open their eyes, and they extend that love to another child in the room, or to the teacher, or to their parents, or to anyone in their lives. It's a tool we teach adults too in our intensives. So that child goes to the love chair, and everybody in the room is extending love in their direction, rather than the teacher being angry because this child disrupted the classroom. If the teacher's angry, the teacher has a problem. The child doesn't. And sadly, many teachers are teaching disabled. They've never worked out the power person dynamics that they developed in childhood. And so they just repeat them and play them out. So one example that Julie shares, and she's in a really poverty-stricken area. Some of these kids don't eat until they get to school and or have lunch at school. And so she's got this one little girl who comes in and her eyes are red and she's obviously been crying. And she takes her coat off and says, Mrs. Haverstick, I need to go to the love chair. So this little kid comes in and explains how she'd had a fight with her mother and hadn't eaten that morning. And she knows enough to go sit in the love chair. And every kid that comes into the classroom embraces her in love, knows how to do that, including the teacher. What if every home had a love chair where maybe when dad gets all pissed and pissy, he gets to go to the love chair and the family sends love to him, or mom, or any of the kids? How different would it be? What if we put our politicians in the love chair when they start using vile, vicious language toward other people? What would our world look like if we actually started to function as human beings? Think about the moment where you first held a newborn child. Think about holding your daughter. If you were to tap into her essence and you describe to me what her essence is in that moment where you first held her, what word would you use?
Love.
So we've asked this question of tens of thousands of people all over the globe. My wife, Jeannie, and I, this is like an introductory question to our Why Is This Happening to Me Again workshop. And virtually everybody's answer is some variation on the theme of love. Then I go to the next step. Tap into her again and tell me, is she loving you or is she love?
Yeah, I would say she is love.
And we live in a culture that specializes in knocking that experience out of us and then sending us out into the world to find somebody to love us or somebody to love. And we now go on a whole false journey that in over 50% of cases leads to divorce, because you can't love anybody and nobody can love you. You can function as love, but it's not a verb. It's not something we do. It's what we are. And if you go back into the ancient Aramaic New Testament, what you find is a set of instructions for how to come to restore yourself to the condition of love that you were born in. Remember, he said, be as a little child for such as these. That's exactly what he was talking about. But we have this false definition. Oh, I'm supposed to love you. You're supposed to love me. And it's an impossible dream. It can't be done, because going back to goals, the mind is a goal-oriented device. When you give it a goal, it will use every bit of data that it's got to seek to achieve that goal. When you give it a goal that it cannot achieve, it will destroy you. It will run itself ragged, overstressed, and eventually burn itself out. And so the shift into, functioning as active present love is where we want to go with this work.
We're going to go to a station break in a little bit, and we would like to come back. I would love to go over the worksheet that you developed. I found that absolutely an excellent piece of work, and would love to know how that was constructed, as well as many other things. So all of you out there in the world listening, we'll be right back. You're listening to Rains County Radio. RainsCountyRadio.com. And we're back with Dr. Ryce learning about really all kind of things: consciousness, love, forgiveness. And we were talking about loving and healing children and had some fascinating constructs on what to do, for example, in the classroom or even at home on how to work with the child. Can we continue on that, Doctor?
Sure. Yeah, the title of the book is, let's see if we can get it in the camera here,
There you go.
Healing Children, Loving Children. And this isn't about you and I loving children, because love isn't something we can do. It's about raising children that are loved, that know who they are as human beings. And one of the other things, if we go to the back cover, so there's a poem on the back of the book, which Mrs. Haverstick, with her kindergartner grade 1 classroom, she'd take one section of her board and she'd write this on the board and tell the kids, this is what we're here to learn. Yeah, we're going to do some reading and writing, arithmetic, but this is what we're really here to learn. So here's one of the first things she works with teaching children, and one of the things we're looking to restore adults to. And the poem's called Who Am I? Who am I? I am somebody. I am bright, capable, and lovable. I am teachable and learn easily. I tell the truth and am a gentle listener. I respect myself and others. I'm cooperative and responsible for my feelings and my choices. I see the highest and best in myself and others and support that with my thoughts, words, and actions. I use time wisely because it's valuable. I'm the best me I can be each day. I am somebody. I am love.
Wow.
Again, getting that in the camera is a trick.
That's okay. I can take a
Okay.
screenshot of that, and plus I can look it up online and put it.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we'll also work with adults with an adult version of what we call My Commitment. And again, this is one of the chalkboards in the room when kindergarten grade 1 classrooms come in, and it's called My Commitment. And it goes like this. I promise to tell you the truth and treat you lovingly, gently, and with respect in my thoughts, my words, and my actions. Being connected to love and being friends with you are the most important things to me. If I'm not feeling loving, I will hold us in my heart as we each gently talk about our own feelings. This way, we learn to cooperate and be responsible for our realities and help each other change the ones we don't like. So part and parcel of that commitment is teaching a child that reality is the output of their minds, that they have their own constructs. One of the games my granddaughter and I play is we'll take any given object. This was a game that started one day when she brought a drawing home from school where she drew I think it was a snow scene. And I said, well, gee, sweetie, that doesn't look like a snow scene to me. That looks like somebody out in a playground. And that's my reality. And your reality is that it's out in the snow. That's interesting. Do you see any other realities? So we ended up about a half an hour. Again, at that point, she's 4. And the game became looking for how many realities we could make up about this object of attention, which was just a simple drawing that she'd done. So we have a granddaughter that knows now that reality is something that's changeable and it's in her mind. She actually very early in us raising her took an interest in anatomy and physiology. And at 3, she would sit for 45 minutes in front of a YouTube video on anatomy and physiology. And about a year or so ago, she'd have been about 4. One day she said, Dad, or Papa, I want to watch a video on the body. So we go and turn YouTube on, we find the one that she wants. And it's a video where there's a cart, it's an anatomy video for children, as on the thing called the Kids Learning Tube. And it's an outline of a human form and all the organs in the form. And then the organs kind of pour out onto the ground in order of size, and each organ sings what their part is. So the eyes come up to sing. It's their turn. And the eyes sing, I am your eyes, I am your eyes, I see the world around you. And Arya looks at me and says, Papa, they don't understand, do they? We don't see with our eyes, we see with our brain.
Wow. That's
If every person on planet Earth knew we see with our brain, people would be changing their brains rather than to try and change everybody else that they're blaming for what they've created in their lives.
that is a great statement. And also the game that you play really facilitates creativity because you're taking an
Oh,
object and go, how many different realities? Now you're facilitating looking and creating different perspective. That's a fabulous game that you guys have on there.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty sweet.
Well, can we go into your 7-step wake up sheet, which I read through and thought it was fabulous as far as reality management and forgiveness? Well, first of all, can you give us a little background on that and then tell us sort of what goes on in each step?
Well, again, the output of the mind is driven by goals. That's like the major foundation, and that literally we have never seen anything with our eyes. That's just a fallacy. And what we see is a construct based upon the light energy that comes into our eyes. And so every construct is malleable and changeable. If a construct in my mind is based in, and so if we go back into the ancient scriptures, you'll hear this man Yeshua saying, oh, be careful, don't judge by appearances. Appearance was a structure in your mind. Mine's different from yours is different from mine, and everybody's got their own reality. If I believe the appearance in my mind, then I substitute the picture painted on the inside of my eyeballs for the actuality of what the creation has to offer me. You know, in that time frame where 10,000 brain cells are firing, a maximum 9 bits of data form our construct, form our reality. It's been estimated in the same time frame that the actuality holds perhaps as much as 20 trillion bits of data. So here we are, potentially, ostensibly, in a 20 trillion bit world with 10,000 brain cells firing, looking at 9 bits of data and thinking we know what's going on out there.
Mm.
And the truth is, the perceptual constructs that show up in our minds always tell us more about the content of our minds than the world we think we're looking at. When you realize that, then you gather a measuring stick for determining whether or not your reality is accurate. Is there any form of hostility or fear in your reality? If there is, then you're working with corrupt data in computer terms, and your reality is false. It's an appearance that it's very convincing. I mean, it's very detailed. Gee, I see bodies and I see people and I see all sorts of things, and I don't see anything that's out there. I see constructs, my mind's best guess about what's going on out there. And my mind's best guess when there's hostility or fear active in me is always giving me information about myself, but never having been taught to turn in on and look inside myself. There's a great line that comes from Carl Jung, and he says, those who look without dream, those who look within awaken.
Mm-hmm.
If you're living in a picture painted on the inside of your eyeballs, and you think it's what's happening out there in the world, according to Jung, you're in a dream. And most people live their whole lives in a dream and do battle with figures of darkness that they refuse to deal with inside themselves. Those who turn within awaken. We get to start to clean up those things. So the idea of the forgiveness process is to go within and to clean up the hostility and fear-based patterns that have been going on for generations and generations and generations. You look at that word generation, and it comes from a root genari, which means cause. There's an interesting parable or metaphor in the ancient Aramaic scriptures about this group of pretty bright people who know a whole lot about astronomy and astrology, and they get lost in a 35 square mile area for 40 years. You might remember that story about the Jews getting lost in the desert. Now, if you believe that this bright group of people can't get out of a 35 square mile area for 40 years, you're pretty gullible. It wasn't about a 35 square mile hot sandy place. That word desert there is another code word for the unconscious. Most people, for about the first 40 years of their lives, are stuck in their unconscious, their own desert, and have no idea how to get out of it. They all want to go to the promised land, but nobody wants to look in there and deal with what's in there that keeps them out of the promised land. And what is the promised land? Is that some place with, coconut trees and milk and honey? No, the promised land is a place where you consciously create your life. Most people create their lives out of their unconscious dynamics. And if they never learn to go inside and clean themselves up, then they ask themselves the question of my book. The title of my book is, why is this happening to me again? As a creator, if you never go inside and clean it up, guaranteed, you're going to get to live it your whole life long. If you decide to go in and make some changes inside, if you find a way to collapse the perception that seems so ironclad true about them, and realize that it's ironclad true about you, if you learn how to collapse it, then you get to drop inside into the hidden parts of your mind. You remember in that story about the Jews wandering in the desert, what had to happen to get out of the desert into the so-called promised land? What did they say? The old generation had to die off.
Mhm.
Did that mean everybody in old physical bodies had to physically die? No. The root of the word generation is genari. It means cause. All of the causes held in the mind, held in the genes, generation after generation after generation, had to be cleaned up. This is a story about genetics. This is about physics and physiology and psychology. It's not a theology text. So, you remember they said, again, going back to our definition of sin is not some terrible, evil, awful thing, but the word sin is an archery term. Miss the target.
Mhm.
What did they say? The sins of the fathers will be passed, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations of those who hate me.
Mhm.
Now you look at that passage, and what you hear is the Creator speaking to us, love, the origin of love, the substance of love speaking to us, saying, if you're stuck in your perceptual constructs, then the only guide you've got is what experience you have inside of yourself and your genes, your generational patterns. And energetically, literally, every thought we think, every piece of information that comes in through our senses is stored, I would offer, as an energy system, is stored holographically in every cell in our structure, including the sperm and the egg. So were you to conceive a child tomorrow, that child would have every thought, every feeling, every reality you've ever engaged in. And one of my favorite tongue-in-cheek lines about children is that having children is like having your unconscious mind hanging out in true living color and Dolby sound. You'll notice that everything you've never dealt with, they do. And punishment is an effort to get them to stop doing what you haven't dealt with. When people start to learn that, when a parent learns that, and they stop trying to manipulate the child into inhibiting the energies that they placed within the child, when they take responsibility, then the whole game changes. But you've got to be willing to do the work of getting out of the desert. And to get out of the desert, you got to go into it, and it's inside of you. So again, we'll go back to our earlier conversation. Goals drive perception. In the Aramaic language, the root of the word forgive, again, is shabag. It means to cancel. When I cancel a goal, my whole perceptual construct collapses. Maybe only for an instant at first, because the mind's really fast at coming back in, coming back in, coming back in with its old stories and its fear and its terror and its trauma. But when I get into habitually collapsing the constructs in my mind based in hostility or fear, I'm able to drop into the deeper and deeper levels, literally right down to and including my own genes, and start to clean it out. So forgiveness meaning removal. And so as I engage in the forgiveness process, I get to free myself from the mind of the body. You remember in the ancient scriptures, they talked about the mind of man.
Mhm.
And then they talked about another mind, which was the mind of Christ, they called it. Not a religious idea, just that there was a man who learned to live out of the mind of love. That word Christ is in Aramaic is an office. It's not the name of a man. It's not his last name. So in Aramaic, let's say if I were running for the mayor, you would call me, if I won, Mayor Michael. mayor isn't part of my name. It's the office I hold. Christ is exactly the same thing. It's an office that this man Yeshua held, that he was able to live out of the mind of love. And we have the right to live in the same mind. That's what he came to teach us. You and I have the right to live in the mind of Christ in us. And we've got to do the work that's offered by this man. There's an interesting passage where there's a group of disciples that come together. And again, this isn't about religion. It's about the reality of where we get to live as human beings, with our kids, with our parents, with our families, with our neighbors, with our friends, with the world community at large. And so this living in this mind of hostility and fear, denial and blame, everything's everybody else's fault. And that's where the whole punishment game comes from, is we're trying to get rid of people who show us what we don't want to deal with. When I apply forgiveness, I get to collapse that reality, and I get to touch into the deeper parts of my own hidden generational patterns. When I bring those patterns up in the presence of active love, and I'm willing to surrender all the blame, all the victimhood, all the horrid messages that I've gotten from the world, I free myself from that generational pattern. I'm now getting out of the desert. But there's a work to be done. And there's an interesting passage where Yeshua has a group of disciples together, and they ask him, in essence, well, what do we need to do to make the Creator happy? And he tells them, he uses an Aramaic idiom, which the Greeks didn't have a clue, didn't understand what he was saying, but he tells them what they need to do. And go back and read that passage, and literally half of his disciples grumble, get up and leave, and say, too hard a saying, and they leave and they never come back. There's such a stir in the disciples at that point that Yeshua even says to Peter, Peter, are you going to leave too? Is this too much for you to handle? What he's asking people to do is to go inside and do this work. But the world says, no, we're going to go out there and we're going to change them. We're going to bring a dogma to the world. We're going to bring our doctrine. We're going to force people to live by what we believe. When, if you go back to Yeshua, in the Aramaic, he made a really simple statement about what he was here for. He didn't say about dogma and doctrine. He said, I come to bring you life more abundantly, period. That's it. What is life? My offering is, go back to when you held that newborn and you knew she was loved. Life is love flowing through a cell. Anything we do to inhibit that destroys us. What do we do with what we inhibit that with? We hide it from ourselves and build pictures of everybody else how they're the problem.
Well, it seems that a lot of our training is to react to the outside world rather than creatively taking what, like you said, like our goals are and implementing it. How would you describe?
And we think we're reacting to the outside world, but we're really reacting to what the outside world resonates in us. We need to make the step into being responsible for what the world brings up in us. Because when I'm in hostility or fear, and I say I'm reacting to the world, no, I'm reacting to a picture based in my unresolved hostility or fear that I think is the world's fault. And I need to learn to collapse that. And that's what forgiveness is about.
Well, when you mentioned that we have 1,000 brain cells activating going off, we have trillions and trillions of them, and we only are dealing with this a small amount of data that we create to what we think is reality. You can piggyback on that with either light or sound, is that of the whole spectrum of sound, we only hear from 20,000 hertz to that, and also on the light, we only just a very, very small fraction and stuff on that can be incorporated. As far as creating our reality, is that we're really limited, as you said. I love your data pictures, that with all this going on, we think what we're dealing with, this small amount of data, is really the whole picture, in a sense, when it's not. But I guess going back to mention about all the energy coming in and we are reacting to it, is that in your line of forgiveness, how did this facilitate creativity? We saw it as an example with you and your granddaughter, that is, to create different realities for the picture. What are some other ways? I mean, I know the old Jewish adage, think it, say it, make it so. That's a process. What process could you add for others so that they can kind of switch it around so that they can take love and make life out of it to throw it through their life?
One of the first actions that needs to take place before we do anything is we need to experience ourselves and literally bring ourselves into our own physiology as the presence of love. Otherwise, we're stuck with this mental construct of the world, thinking we're dealing with the world, but we're really dealing with projections of what's going on inside of us. And the starting point of that insanity, literally, it's a mental illness. The starting point of that is denial. And we have a specific definition of denial in this work. And denial, I would offer, is the act of thinking or speaking as though something outside of us is the cause of what's moving inside of us. So when I say you made me mad, there's mad moving in me, and I hold the belief that you're the cause of it. What I just did is I said to my mind, remember the evidential mind, the mind only, out of that mass of data, only gives you the evidence you give it permission to. And if my goal is to make sure that I know you're to blame for my mad, then I use those words. You made me mad. What I just said to my own massive multi-generational database is, yep, I'm mad again, but I have no interest in being responsible for the fact that I'm mad. Show me a picture that that guy out there is the cause of my anger. And now my mind takes data, builds a picture of you, and very convincingly with my own AI, this is artificial intelligence. When we're working out of this multi-generational database, it's comparable to working with AI. Whatever instructions you give it, it formulates a very convincing picture that has us believe that that's the problem out there. And so when I give that kind of an instruction, then I'm stuck in the mind of man. It's interesting. There's another interesting passage that ties in here from the ancient Aramaic scriptures. And this man, Yeshua, goes to the Garden of Gethsemane. He brings along some support. He's got some heavy duty work to do. He brings along some support, 3 disciples. He's in there for a few minutes. You know, he's not sure he's ready to deal with all this. He says, Father, can this cup pass from me? And he taps into the men that he brought to support him, to hold the space of love for him. And he goes out and they're sound asleep. He's like, can't you guys stay awake for an hour? Can't you hold the space of love for me for just 1 hour? And they couldn't, because they hadn't dealt with death and the fear that had to be dealt with. So he goes back into the garden. As a naturopathic medicine, one of the things that that is understood is that when you're going to heal, any kind of symptomatic energy that's in you has to be moved out of you. And an extreme case like the one we're told about that happened in the Garden of Gethsemane would literally look like sweating blood, I suspect, physiologically, in order to do the work that was done there. And then he comes out, and here's Peter. You know, Peter's the guy who, on the way to the Garden of Gethsemane, said, how many swords should we bring? And Yeshua said, just bring one. Can you imagine how excited they were? They thought this guy was going to defeat the whole Roman army, and he's only going to need one sword. Man, that's an exciting picture, isn't it? Yeshua comes out of the garden. There's Peter. The high priest servant shows up, the man who's going to shred Yeshua's body to pieces, and he knows it. And Peter takes the sword and whacks off his ear. What does Yeshua do? He functions as a human being. Does he dress the high priest servant down and berate him and send him away? No. He reaches forward to the man who's going to be mercilessly slaughtered, and he heals him. Now, I've had people who've listened to my thoughts on that say, well, that's interesting, Michael, but did you notice that doing that got him dead? It's like, yeah, I noticed that doing that got him dead. Did you notice they couldn't keep him that way? He didn't come to teach the power of suffering. He came to teach the power of living as a human being, living as the presence of love that extends love to everyone, even someone as evil as the high priest servant. And he turned to Peter in that whole scenario. Pete's got the sword and he's going to protect him. What does Yeshua say to Peter? He addresses Peter directly as Satan. And he says, get thee behind me, Satan. And then he tells us what He means in Aramaic by Satan. And the Greeks got this one right, but it's hidden away and forgotten. He says, for you think in the mind of man rather than the plan of God. You're in carbon-based memory. You're in your own database, building a world out of the interior and totally and completely ignoring the exterior. So trapped in Satan. In Aramaic, the word Satan means the resistor, one who misleads. It's not the dude out there with the red suit, the tail, and the pitchfork. It's inside of us. But nobody wants to go there. No, let's keep it the dude out there. Well, I mean, if you want to ignore his teachings, keep the dude out there. But listen very carefully. He says, this is Satan. You think in the mind of man. You're in the perceptual constructs in your mind. What forgiveness does is it collapses those. And when those realities collapse, then they drop in on their own footprint. You know, this isn't a very nice example, but we all saw the 9/11 towers when they were hit by the airplanes and they dropped free fall speed into their own footprint. That's what happens with the construct of the mind when you cancel a goal. Again, in Aramaic, the word forgive is shabag. It means to cancel. When you cancel a goal, the structure that your mind is showing you, the picture, the construct collapses. And when it collapses into its own footprint. Now you have direct access to your own unconscious dynamics.
Okay. And
Why did they twist forgiveness, and why don't people want to do forgiveness? Because you got to face everything that's in there, and it's not an easy task.
well, speaking of collapsing that particular thing, is there a way we can translate that process into eliminating grief?
Yeah, absolutely. 2000%. Yes.
Okay. Can you give us a couple of descriptions on that in our final minutes here?
Well, my wife and I used to travel 6 to 10 months of the year for almost 40 years. I was on the road. We paid our own expenses. Our workshops were done free. Our commitment was to give these tools away. Whether people had money or not was irrelevant. By the way, we do have a radio show 5 days a week from 1 till 2 o'clock, where we have an ongoing conversation going on for 12 years. There are over 4,000 hours in our archives. And the Kavor's manuscript that we started out talking about, we actually have a book that we published called Enlightenment. Again, get the camera here.
Okay. And plus, I'll put it in the description. I'll put a link in the interview right below the interview.
Okay. So anyway, on January 15th, we're going to start on our radio show a study of this book, which we've published. It's what we've published so far from the Kavor's manuscript. And we have a special where the book normally sells for 25 plus shipping. It's on our website or at least people can purchase it for 26 and we'll pay the shipping. And it's a text that is what we've published so far from this ancient manuscript. It's the Kavor's is a 2nd century copy of, or pardon me, a 10th century copy of a text from 164 AD. So it makes us the oldest known copy of the original Aramaic language.
Wow.
New Testament. So it goes back to about 164 AD. And the text consists of 3 parts. There's an introduction, how was the text found, that sort of thing. Then there's some select passages from the New Testament where the keywords are left in Aramaic. And then there's a first century dictionary. Back in the 70s, it was a group of translators, 25 of the world's top Aramicists. And the primary goal that they had was to establish the first century meanings of those Aramaic words. What did the words mean when they fell from Yeshua's lips? And so that's what we'll be starting to study in our radio show on the 15th of January. And anybody who wants to participate in that, most people call into the show on their phones. They've got unlimited long distance. They can access it through our website, which is whyagain.org. They can access it through our website as well. But most people have unlimited long distance and they just call into the show and they listen directly with their phones. And then if they have a question, they can push 1 and that raises a hand in the control panel and we'll be having a conversation if you have any questions about any of this. Also, we have the world's only forgiveness app. So people can download an app and do this forgiveness process, become acquainted with the worksheet and how the process works, ask questions, The app is very sophisticated and very private. So there's a way that people can access the work through the app. And to get to the app, just go to your app store on your phone and type in Heartland, one word, Heartland, Aramaic, Aramaic, Forgiveness. And that'll bring up a few different apps. And one with the red glowing heart is our app, and you can do forgiveness on your phone. And if you have any questions anywhere within the app, you can click a button and say, gee, this step 3 doesn't make any sense. Michael, how does it work? Hit send. That will go to my wife, Jeannie, and her email. She'll read it on our next radio show. We'll answer the question, send you back a link so that you can tap in and listen to the answer to your question. So everything we can do to support people in understanding this is what we're about, what it's all about. So again, so I have a structure in my mind, the mind of man, which Yeshua defined as Satan, and it's goal driven. So when I cancel a goal, now people say, well, why would I give up, Michael, this perfectly, I just have the goal for this person to treat me lovingly, gently, and respectfully. Why would I cancel that goal? Well, that's a wonderful goal. Everybody should have that goal for everybody, and everybody should be doing that. I'm in agreement. But the reason I'm going to cancel it is because if I notice that when I load it in my mind, it resonates something based in hostility or fear in me, corrupt data, I cancel it because I need to go inside and deal with my own corrupt data. Otherwise, I'm going to be living out an appearance that makes me believe that somebody else is the problem in my life. Again, that's where every victim conversation comes from, is errant perception. So I cancel the goal to collapse and drop into the root of my own pain. Now, that's one of the biggest things that inhibits people from doing the work. Nobody wants to go there. There's a process that we do in a workshop called Codependence to Interdependence. And we develop an idea of what we call a power person. And a power person was someone in your life who had more power over your life than you did, was not functioning as love. And the child in that situation, it's usually a parent and a child in this power person dynamic, not always. And the child believes that it's survival. When those 3 things happen, power person's got the power, not functioning as love, child perceives survival. As an energy field, the child's energy field just opens wide and becomes a sponge and just sucks in every energy from the environment, even if the energies aren't expressed. A parent who's got rage going on inside of them, controlling their temper, but the child's in that survival mode, really absorbs that rage. For the rest of that person's life, their behavior is going to be controlled by the power person dynamic in them. And there will only be 3 behaviors possible for that person, literally for the rest of their lives. And I'd offer this runs the world, the power person dynamic.
That sounds like a very interesting dynamic, and I will. I'm going to send people to your website as well as the other links. If you could send me that I can put
Sure.
underneath the interview. Thank you so much for taking time to share all this with us. I'm sure all my audience will enjoy this, and will. Any final words you'd like to say? My audience will enjoy this, and will. Any final words you'd like to say in the last minute here before we sign off?
I would actually, the behaviors, I want to just cover what the behaviors are and why we would do any one behavior compared to another based on the power person dynamic. And that is that the behaviors that people do throughout their lives are determined by the level of stress they're under. Once a power person dynamic is installed in someone's mind, until it's forgiven, removed, that's going to drive their lives. And the level of stress they're under will determine which behavior they do. When there's little or no stress, people will do whatever they did to get along with their power person. When stress starts to build, and you might just take a look at this in your own life, when stress starts to build, people will shift into doing whatever they did to resist and survive with their power person. And then when they become ultra stressed, they will do what their power person did to them that they hated the most.
Okay. Well,
until they learn to collapse that and go inside and clean it up, it runs the world.
Fabulous. Well, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to having you on it again. And next time we're passing through those arcs, we'd love to come by and say hi.
Awesome.
All right.
All right, sir. Delighted. Blessings.
Yes. Blessings to you too. And thank you so much.